go to the content section. I'm going to say for all items that are not the target or the intro, this applies to you. Again, I'm specifying all items that are directly underneath content that are not either the target or the intro. Apply this style. Well, the style that I'm going to apply is going to be a Z index. So I'll do that first. Target refers to target locations in the page that are referenced by anchor tags in the same page. And I'm going to use one more powerful selector, target itself, but its value is going to be a 2. The introduction section should be the default that shows. Everything else should be hiding behind it. However, if something gets selected from the menu option, bring it to the very top so that we can see it. I'm going to go over and refresh the browser now. And I can see the complete topic list. If I click on contact or intro or about, I now happen to have navigation. So it appears that I have multiple pages. This is all being brought by the power of that target selector. I still have some clipping, and that's going to be addressed in another module. I also want to add a different selector, and that is the selection one. This is going to allow me to change the way text is going to look when it's selected from the user. So before I save anything here, I would like to show what the default selection looks like. So I'll go over into our topics list, and when I select it, it's basically a white text with a blue background. I'm going to go back and save using these new colors, and I'll refresh. And now when I select the text, it's using my color scheme instead of what the default was for the browser. To bring a little more containment to the page, I'm going to add one more of these selectors here, this root selector. Again, it's like body, except it encompasses the entire document. So if I say the background color of the root is a certain color, it truly will encompass the entire browser window. Now I'm starting to get a little closer to what this site's supposed to look like. Again, I still have this clipping issue, which will be addressed soon. But as I navigate through, I can start to see the page is just about to come to life. Now we're going to continue the same mode of thinking with selectors, except specifically with the use of form inputs. As the user is providing data, there's state of data that we may want to style accordingly. So think of it that way, selectors of state with regard to the data that's being provided. We can provide styling based on if something is enabled, disabled, or checked, whether it's valid, invalid, optional, or required. And there's even the ability for us through vendor prefixed definitions to highlight things such as placeholder data that sits inside of input tags. This is like the watermarks out there that say, hey, put a name or an email or an address in me. So we're going to see an example of that. And of course, the best way to really get a good understanding of it is to see it all in action. This is the page as we left it. I'm on the contact page, and this is where we're going to have some data entry. This is where we have some input tags already there. The input tags have placeholders in them. For example, our text area here says comments in there. If I were to try to type something in there, of course that goes away, but if I empty it, then the comments reappears. That's the placeholder. And we have it also here, but it's kind of hard to read because of the color scheme. So that's why it's important to be able to address that and style it. If I click submit right away, it's going to tell me no because I didn't fill out the first form or the first entry in that form. It's a required field. Even if I do, and then I come down here and try to submit, then it's going to say the email needs to be provided. And if I just say yes, and then hit submit again, well, now it's going to say to enter an email address. So it's functional, but I might want to style things slightly different based on the state of the data. So that's what we're going to do right now, is go into the CSS and see how we can style these things through these selectors. I'm going to start with dealing with data that's either required or valid. So I'm going to go ahead and paste some data in here. You'll notice that the required selector, I could have preceded it with an input. If not, it just means anything that would be marked as required, which is typically inputs. If it's required, I want a different background color. If the data is valid, then make sure the background color is white. So I'm going to save that right now, go back over to the site and do a refresh. And we could see slight differences already. Now remember, the thing that we did is we wanted to know if something was required, and you can see there's a slightly different background color in here than there is over here in the comments. Comments are not required. If I do put something valid in here, let's say XXX, you'll notice that the background is completely white now because it's valid data, because I provided something. If I do the same here, XXX, notice it did not change the color because XXX is not a valid email. So it looks like everything is working good so far. Let me go back over into the code. I now want to address something dealing with the placeholder data. So I'm going to provide some code here. You'll note here that I'm using a vendor prefix, and other prefixes should be added to this page to support other browsers, but for brevity, I'm just keeping it to one specific vendor prefix at this time. Notice that I'm combining a valid selector with now an input placeholder selector. And I've done it here, and I've also done it on this line. What I'm saying is if the data is valid, I want the placeholder to look this way. If it's invalid, I want it to look this way. Well, if you haven't figured it out already, what I'm really saying is I want the data to look the same whether it's valid or invalid. And this is the way you have to do that if you want that kind of an effect. So I'm going to save this, return now over to the website, and I'm going to refresh it. So you can see that now the placeholder data is consistent. It is italic. And if I go in here and do something, then I'm going to have a different font and different color. If I go into full name and provide something like my name, then of course that placeholder data goes away. If I click submit, I'm still being informed that the data is not correct. So everything is working exactly the way I want so far. Let me go back over into the code. Another thing I want to address, and I can again do this with the power of selectors, is I want to make sure that if there is anything optional, such as the text area, I want it to be dash. But I also want to make sure that I'm not going to inadvertently select my submit button. So I'm saying if it's not a submit button, but anything else, and it's optional, go ahead and make the border style dashed. So I'm going to save that, go back over to the website, refresh, and now you can see the comments are dashed, not the submit button, nor anything else. So that's quite a bit for this module. In summary, we learned how we can add font faces, which allow us to bring in the kind of fonts that we want without using any images. We also learned how we can precisely select content that we want to style on the page, and this also includes the kind of stateful data that we would want to style in our form entry screens. This concludes this module.